Good evening. A social worker in Ottawa faced an ethical dilemma that put her in a challenging position. She had to report a family to the authorities due to a suspicion of physical abuse towards their child. Our reporter Catalina is in downtown Ottawa with the social worker and the mother to help us understand the situation better. Catalina?
That's right, Danica. I'm here with Jenny Lesmes, who is a registered social worker from the Toronto Metropolitan University. And as you said, she did face a very tough situation, having to report a family over a suspicion of child abuse. Mrs. Lesmes, did you talk to the parents?
Hello, Catalina. So yes, I did. I work for the Children's Aid Society, and I have a client. He's a 5-year-old boy. I know him and the family fairly well. One day he came in for a session, and I noticed that he had bruises on his knees. I was concerned. I asked him how he got them, and he answered and told me that his mom got angry and disciplined him. This worried me, and I was concerned that there was possible case of abuse happening here.
You mentioned you had an ethical dilemma. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so I asked the mom about the bruises, and she said that they happened because the child was playing and jumping. However, he told me that it was because his mom had disciplined him. She did admit that on one occasion she had spanked him because he was not obeying her. This did worry, and it did increase my concerns of possible abuse.
What was your decision, and how did you get to it?
So the Children's Aid Society has a policy that states that everyone, especially an employee, has the obligation to make a report when they suspect that a child could possibly be getting abused or harmed by its parents. I was conflicted by this because I did know the parents fairly well, and I have been working with the parents and this child for quite a long time. I knew that they were not abusive towards the child, despite the spanking that one time, and I was worried that by reporting it they could potentially lose custody of their child, and this would do more harm than good.
Did the police run an investigation?
Yeah, so they did run an investigation, and they did actually find out that the bruises were not because of abuse. They were actually just because the child was very playful, and he was falling and jumping around, and it was just accidental bruising.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lesmes. Back to you in studio, Danica.
Thank you, Catalina. To talk more about the situation here in the studio, we have Mrs. Gonzalez, the child's mother. Good evening, Mrs. Gonzalez.
Good evening.
How did you feel when you learned that Miss Lesmes had to report you for a possible case of abuse?
You know, I felt very, very terrible. I was stressed, I had sleepless nights, That's my baby, I didn't want to lose my baby.
In the moment, what made you decide to spank your child?
In our culture, spanking is allowed. We grew up getting spanked. And I didn't know that in Canada it's not allowed, and it was only one time.
Okay. What happened after the police concluded that the child was safe at home?
Our social worker, Miss Lesmes, she went on to re-educate us on how to handle situations in a non-violent manner, and next time we'll be able to manage the situation in a different way.
Great. Thank you very much, Mrs. Gonzalez. We have invited Thomas Lawrence, a guest analyst, to talk more about the case. We are back in studio with Dr. Lawrence. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Danica, for having me on the show.
What does the Code of Conduct say about this type of situation, and why was this an ethical dilemma?
Yeah, the Code of Ethics explicitly says that we should maintain the best interest of the client as the primary professional obligation.
Who is the client in this case?
In this case, the child is the client, so we must protect the child's welfare and rights, And about the ethical dilemma, we can define it as any situation that involves a decision that could create contradictions of values, beliefs, etc.
Did the social worker do the right thing?
Yes, from my point of view, social workers and social service workers should always evaluate the situation to determine what is the best for the client. There's an important concept coined by Bentham. He said, the greatest good for the greatest number, or in this scenario, the best well-being for the child. And CAS has a strict policy to report any case of possible vulnerability or violence against children.
What if the social worker hadn't have reported the case?
That's an excellent question, Danica. We can just make assumptions, and we should put the story in perspective. And what we have in this case, we have just versions of the truth, we have bruises, we have a child's speech, and parents who show themselves as good parents. But what if the social worker, in this case, would decide by herself to skip reporting? Could it unintentionally violate the child's rights?
That's a good point. On the other hand, the child could be taken away by CAS, so we never know. It's so challenging to make decisions.
Yeah, exactly. That's because it's so important to reread the Code of Ethics, explore the scenario, and analyze it in detail.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Danica.
That is all we have tonight for SSW News. See you next time.